right. Our speaker today is an author, a yoga instructor, a spiritual teacher, and a renowned dog owner. Okay, Kevin Hauber, you're up.
Good morning, all. Can you hear me? Okay. So yeah, my renowned dogs have to be in their nests because they resound while they're renowned, and they tend to be really noisy. So so they're going to be outside for a little bit while we do this. But let me start with a quote today. A lot of you might recall John Kabat-Zinn, who developed mindfulness-based stress reduction years ago, and I've been practicing that and teaching that ever since. He had a quote that I found particularly relevant. He said that you can't stop the waves, but you can learn how to surf. You can't stop the waves, but you can learn how to surf. So today's lesson is titled Riding the Waves. And that's what we're going to talk about this morning. So I was thinking about the wave experiences that we've all had over the past few years. So go back a little over a year and a half, and that was the first COVID wave. And with everything shutting down and isolation and everybody figuring out how to do just about everything online without any human contact. So there was that challenge in that wave. And there was a lot of innovation that came out of that in the process. And we do things very different now than we did. I took my whole yoga program online and never knew that I could do that before, but it was a necessity is the mother of invention kind of thing. And we all worked through challenges like that. And then there was the election wave with all of the drama that came with that. And then the denial of the election results wave. And I wouldn't say that that one is fully passed yet, but it's at least a lot past. And then next was the insurrection wave. That's all still sorting itself out and turning more into the subpoena wave. Talk about drama there. And then that coincidentally it seems to be running with the denial of the insurrection wave that is in some spheres. And then there's been the wave of relief as we came out from under COVID and everybody started coming out of hiding and seeing each other again and buying cars and going to restaurants and taking vacations. And that, of course, brought on the wave of price increases for all of those things that's been going on. If you've gone to buy anything recently, especially if it's been a major purchase, it's just stunning. And then now we're back in the COVID Delta wave again, but this time it's the newer and stronger version of COVID, and a lot of people have retrenched and gone back into isolation or online. Witness what we're doing here this morning to be able to make it through that wave. And somewhere in there was the recall election wave that just passed here recently. So lots of waves, and the waves just keep coming, don't they? It's one after another. There's always something following, and it makes for a lot of news and a lot of spin and a lot of counter spin and on and on and on, wave after wave after wave. And so within those larger wave shared experiences are our own personal waves for what's ever going on for us. Now, in the past few months, I've been working through waves around health, been working through waves around work and around family and all kinds of other stuff. And there have been moments where I wonder, when will the waves stop? Anybody else ever wonder that one? When will the waves stop? And then I realized that they never will. And I think some people wait to engage in life until there are no waves to deal with. Good luck with that. just isn't going to happen. And I think that the thought process for that goes something like this: if I can just make it through this health crisis, then everything will be okay. If I can just make it through this financial crisis, then everything will be okay. And if I can just get through this relationship crisis, then everything will be okay. Ever thought stuff like that? Ever had that one run through? I think we probably all have in some form. But the waves keep coming, just like the ocean, just like every time I walk down to the beach, the waves just keep rolling in. The intensity might vary, but the waves keep coming. So what to do? Well, I think we could all take a page out of the playbook from our surfer friends and ride the waves instead of struggling against them. So let's talk about that here this morning and talk about that kind of approach to the waves of life. So let's follow that analogy for a moment. So surfing waves, I don't know how many of you have done that in the past, but it can be exhilarating, even a little bit frightening, especially when the surf is way overhead. But it's a very alive kind of activity. Coincidentally, when I was working on this service, Kristen was watching Point Break. And that reminded me of the aliveness of the surfing in an odd Keanu Reeves dude kind of way. It just it brought that back, that there is all of that exhilaration around it. And I know a lot of people who treat surfing like church, that it's their opportunity to get back in connection with nature and literally flow with things. Probably the biggest problem factor that I see is when we make the waves wrong, i.e., the waves shouldn't be the way that they are. Ever thought that? How often does that come up? Things shouldn't be the way that they are. Likely in most thought processes and conversations, that kind of stuff comes up. Fighting what is, fighting the waves seems to be a basic human sport. We engage in that all the time. So how's that working? How is it working to fight what is? And even if we're not doing that personally, we can see the results of fighting what is all around us. So when I was a kid, my grandmother used to listen to hate radio before it was even fashionable. Lots of John Bircher type stuff way back when, and she got herself so worked up about stuff that isn't even remembered now 50 years later. Really worked up. I mean, this was just a big deal. Why bother? And so it makes me wonder, what does riding the waves and stepping aside from the struggle and the resentment look like? Now that's an interesting subject to me. What does riding the waves and stepping aside from the struggle and the resentment look like? So one of the basic premises that I want to discuss is that energy comes in waves by nature. Energy comes in waves by nature. And again, we can choose to like it or not, but physics confirms the wave-like nature of energy. So we might feel like the little particles that are being bombarded by the waves, which is actually a pretty good analogy, because there are so many streams of energy and so many waves that are going on at the same time, and we're right in the midst of that. So can we agree that there are waves of so many sorts happening in life, hitting us simultaneously or in series, and that's something that we're all experiencing? So let's set that as a basic agreement in the conversation. And can you accept that this is part of how life shows up, and spend a few minutes minimizing judgments about it. I'm going to say that again, because that's a key takeaway here. Can you accept that this is part of how life shows up and spend a few minutes minimizing judgments about it, minimizing resistance to what is? Okay, so next, consider that what we experience in these waves on the outside leads to emotional waves in us. Now, this is where we get into the idea that it's not about what's happening on the outside, but about how we process it. Now, there are emotional waves happening inside of us all the time, very often unconsciously. So here's a question for you. Have you ever known someone who had very strong emotional waves and no awareness of it at all? And they just kept projecting it out onto everyone around them. It was always somebody else's fault. That is a problem, isn't it? That's a tough one to work with. Now, in my experience, it's okay to have strong emotional waves. There just needs to be awareness and perspective that goes along with it. It's the ability to get beyond being totally identified with the emotional waves. That's vital. It's the difference between I am angry and a part of me is feeling anger right now. Do you get the difference there in perspective between being consumed in the wave of anger and being able to observe it? Now that's really important stuff. There are so many emotional states that can consume us if we don't work on our observation skills. And this is where our meditation practices and the other things that we do together come in really valuable. When we have that perspective, we can make choices that are unavailable to us when we're consumed in the emotion. Have you ever noticed that for yourself, that at a time when you might be consumed in emotion, that it's very difficult to make good choices? So we're cultivating that I in the middle of the storm way of being when we're working with this. Now, so think back to a time that you're able to access that and felt like the eye in the center of the storm. This gets into the idea of the personal versus the transpersonal. Personal being about me and my feelings and my judgments and my projections and my experience, versus the transpersonal of taking all of the fuel of whatever is going on for us personally and turning that into, oh, I'm going to use that to be able to create what I want in my life, what I am destined to be here for. So using the experience of the personal and transcending it into the transpersonal. And that's where we develop a sense of purpose, a sense of mission in life. Now, the other thing that I've learned in the process is to not make decisions based on what's going on in the emotional wave in the moment. Now, this leads to that piece of wisdom about not pressing send on something written in anger until you've slept on it, or maybe slept on it for a while. So there are very few things other than arterial bleeding that require a right now response. Now, there are going to be a lot of people that try and convince you otherwise, but most often they're trying to sell something. If they want you to do something right now. Reminds me of what Sadie used to talk about, where she talked about urgency as a form of controlling behavior, and it is. So the next time that somebody's acting really urgent around you, consider that. So let's look at this from another perspective. All around and all through us is wave energy that is God creating in form. The cycling of this energy as waves is a natural expression. That is how energy shows up. It shows up in form. It shows up in nature around us. It shows up in our own form. And we experience the waves of energy and events individually and collectively. So we have emotional waves that are powered in this process. We can choose to be consumed in those waves or to gain perspective and ride through them and make choices that are beneficial. It is up to us. So when someone around us is not riding the waves gracefully, what is the most supportive thing to do without being enabling? So believe me, that was a big part of the family drama that I've worked with recently, was trying to get that in balance. Now, boundaries are a good start. Being able to say, yes, I hear you, and that's you, that's not me. Sending love at a distance is another good option. Here's an example that I had from last year with Kristen's mom. A lot of you'll remember there was a fire that burned here through Shell Beach last summer. And as the fire moved across the hillside several hundred yards from our house, we got the dogs ready and got ready to get in the cars and go. Not that there was anywhere to go exactly, because the escape routes north and south along the highway were cut off by the fire. So we would have had to have escaped into the sea. So fortunately, we didn't have to evacuate, but as I watched the fire in readiness to go if need be, I realized that the fire was burning toward my in-laws' house. That's a short distance south of us here in Shell Beach. And I called my mother-in-law to make sure that her and dad were okay. They were in Southern California. They had no idea what was happening. So she told me to go to their house and get the garden hose out and start sprinkling the roof. I said, no, Mom, I have to be ready to evacuate my family and my pets if the fire turns toward us. I'm not going to drive toward the fire to sprinkle your vacant house. I'm glad that you and Dad are okay. So she called my brother-in-law and told him to do the same thing, and he declined too. So my point is that unregulated emotional waves demand some pretty amazing stuff. And I imagine you probably had some similar experiences where you said, you want what? You want me to go into the fire? I don't think so. So the thing that I have to remember in experiences like that, or like when my brother recently went into his anti-vaxxer vitriol, wasn't more of a tirade, is that, you know, when people do stuff like that, that's the way that they are. For whatever reason, that's what they need to do and experience as their reality this time around. There is a lot of suffering from being angry and fearful and constantly railing against what is. That consumes huge amounts of life force. Now, I have to work on compassion for that suffering, even if I judge it to be self-inflicted. So we can have awareness of the waves that are going on without being consumed by them. Now, there's another way that I want to bring in that I'm going to talk about in terms of my own experience. You know, some of you know that my spirit animal is a sea turtle. I love to swim with them when I'm in the tropics. I wish there were some locally here, but the water's too cold and you have to go to the aquarium to see them. So, you know, the aquarium or the tropics to be with my sea turtle brethren. And I remember one of the first times that I swam with the turtles was on Maui on a dive that I took on Maui. And to do that, I had to wade out through the surf, and then swim out from there. And that was the rough part. But then if you've ever had this experience, you know that you're bobbing along on the surface and the waves are crashing and all that kind of stuff. And then you drop down beneath the surface, and everything gets really still and really quiet. The energy driving the waves on the surface was still there, but it was calm enough down below to be able to hang out with the turtles and enjoy some of their timeless wisdom while we swam along together. And some of these turtles live 300 years. So, I mean, they acquire a lot of wisdom along the way. So it's really cool to go out and be with them, but they just hang out below. They go up to the surface when they need to take a breath, and then they come back down. And then they say, yeah, I'm done with you now. I'm going to go eat some grass over here. So that energy deeper down is much more calm and gradual in terms of the waves that come and the tides and the back and forth. So do you get the difference? The struggling on the surface versus getting below the surface and hanging out with that calmer energy that's down below. I mean, to me, the choice in that is obvious. Now, the other observation to make about choosing to surf is that it takes a lot of energy to ride those surface waves. I don't know of anybody who surfs for hours and hours on end. So we have to be wise about how long we plug into that more turbulent energy before withdrawing. See what kind of great analogies come out of this stuff. You know, this is really ripe things to look at in terms of the kinds of things that that come toward us, and especially if we're allowing them to crash over us. So remember from John Kabat-Zinn, and your takeaways for today: you can't stop the waves, but you can learn how to surf. So thank you, bless you, namaste. Pleasure being with you here this morning.